Good evening and welcome to Great Presbyterians Ruminations. This is a program which enables us to know why basically Presbyterians are great people. This is our very maiden session and we are here with one of our friends, one of the persons who has mapped the history of the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon, the Very Reverend Dr. Nyansako Ni-Nku. Good evening, Reverend.
Thank you, welcome, good evening, welcome to Kumba.
Thank you very much, Reverend.
Yeah.
So we are going to begin, and Presbyterians want to know how the church started and how your ministry has been. So basically, we are going to have a few set of questions to encourage us to know more about what we think and what Presbyterians now and posterity should follow from the ministry.
Okay.
So before we get into all of that, we want to know the man Nyansako.
Well, there's not much about the man, but by God's grace, I've been in the ministry for over 40 years now. Because I started off in Nyansako as a young seminarian. That was in 1966. I'm not sure any of you were born at the time. And then I grew up, graduated, and was ordained, became a pastor. And from then on, I became very conscious of my calling as a pastor and what our responsibilities were as a church. And then after that, as I kept roaming the churches in Africa on ecumenical missions, I became known in the ecumenical world. And so I became elected a member of the executive committee of the World Council of Churches for 14 years. Until I realized that time had come for me to start addressing the issue of my own retirement. I needed a little bit more time, so I requested them to step so that I could step down. Cumulatively with that, I was moderator of the Presbyterian Church. After serving the synod as synod clerk for 10 years, I became moderator, and at the same time, I was elected president of the All Africa Conference of Churches for another 5 years in Kenya, in Nairobi. So you could say I had a really hectic life, great involvement with the ecumenical platform. So after all that, I thought time was now right for me to go back home and redress issues of family, issues of retirement. I had children who knew very little about me, though we slept in the same house, because I was always very absent. And my wife had become quite alone in the house. You know, as it is leadership, I always describe it as a very lonely business. The higher you go, the more you lose your friends and you find out you are just alone. So because of that, I decided to step down and spend the last 5 years of my career just in Boya, occasional trip abroad, but not as much as I was doing. And I'm happy to see the products of our efforts. I can see young pastors whom I virtually admitted into the service and raised them up, and I see them now in leadership in all strata of the church. So that is Nyansako Ni-Nku.
Wow. And what about Nyansako Ni-Nku, the boy in primary school?
Well, that's a long, long time. Let's not go there.
All right.
Yes, all that was here in Kumba.
Okay.
Yes, in primary school, but maybe we'll find time for that later.
Did you always want to become a pastor?
Incidentally, no. I wasn't prepared to become a pastor, and I wasn't even desirous to become a pastor because, again, like I said, when you go to my childhood, it's complicated. I was raised by a widow. My father was a preacher like I am. And when he died, I wasn't too happy the way, as a child, I saw my mother almost abandoned by the mission church, because the last mission at the time. So I signed off my being with the Presbyterian Church, which was past mission at the time. And everybody told me in the family that, look, if you want to correct anything that you see wrong in the church, you have to be a church member yourself in order to have a platform. So in 1966, I started feeling the urge, the call to come back to the church and join the ministry. And when it was announced in the family that I had written the entrance examination to go to the seminary and train as a pastor, There was jubilation in the family, but some people did not believe. They thought it could be any other person in the family, not me, because I had become very anti.
All right.
I had become more or less a rebel. I was critical of the church. I thought that its social engagement was weak. I thought that it was not carrying on the concern about the issues of social justice. And so all these were motivations that kind of encouraged me that if I go to into the church and for any reason become ordained, in my preaching, this will constitute my agenda.
All right. And apart from that, can you say that you followed your goals? When you look at 10 on 10 for your achievements, what mark will you give yourself?
No. It's difficult for me to give myself mark, but I am thankful to God for the things that we managed to do, because we managed to raise the church to a level where it was recognized internationally, to the point where we could nominate Cameroonians, some of them who are still holding offices abroad, because we nominated them, because they said that's the church we have been talking about, that's the way we expected an indigenous church to be like. I was very much concerned and influenced by the ideas of Calvin. John Calvin, he is the founder of Presbyterianism and Reformed theology. So Calvin, he was in Geneva, between Paris and Strasbourg and Geneva. And he is the one who influenced the kind of democratic city-state that you have in Geneva today. And he was concerned with the core values of justice, of peace, and unity. And he thought that the church should be able to raise this in its engagement with society. And he thought that the church was only a church as much as it can make everybody a preacher. So he believed very much in the priesthood of all believers, the ordained and the unordained. The ordained having their own role to play, and the unordained having their own role to play.
And that's John Calvin for us. and I would like to ask, you mentioned the platforms like SEPCA, that's Council of Protestant Churches.
Yes.
You mentioned AACC, All African Conference of Churches.
And World
Council of Churches.
And World Alliance of Reformed Churches.
And World Alliance of Reformed Churches.
Yes.
So we used to hear these names in Brain Trust. We heard them a lot. But some of us did not really know what impact or what benefit they had to us. And we know it's really during the service, your labor of love as moderator, that these, we really felt this. So can you explain to the lay Presbyterian, that farmer who wants to know, I knew Very Reverend Dr. Nyansako Ni-Nku as president of SEPCA, or what did this mean to me?
Yes, I wasn't very much involved with SEPCA because I was already involved with the World Ecumenical family. So I asked my senior clerk then to get more involved with SEPCA. Although, of course, I got engaged when they had programs to offer. But you know that, like I say, that was a time when we started going into practical engagement with ordinary people, the women of the community. How does Christianity push them to live their lives as Christians and at the same time to be engaged in the control of their personal economy, and how they could raise their voices for issues of local justice on little things that involve them in the quartier. And I think that we succeeded to let them know that when we say SEPCA, when we say church is not something by people right up there. Church is something that involves the grassroots of people. And we succeeded because most of that time, the Anglophone churches were not very, very warm to these things of SEPCA, so they saw it as a Francophone organization. Until we succeeded then to have our moderator, then our ASUM, to be involved in SEPCA to the point where we set him up for elections and he became president of SEPCA. Now, I was in the AACC at the time as president of the AACC, and later on, like I said, I became moderator of the church. again, it was the same way. We had to run workshops to introduce the local populations to these great names like Calvin, like World Alliance of Reformed Churches, and started having people become staff of those organizations so that they became very, very well known by the constituencies of their churches here in Cameroon.
And when you look back, what do you think you have done differently?
It's a bit difficult to say because I was very passionately involved with those things, but I think that maybe sometimes I realized that we did not reach the grassroots as much as we could. And I think that we could have done a lot more. I thought when I was retiring, I thought that if we had set up in SEPCA or in the PCC a department for faith and order that would be concerned with trying to bring order and faith into the lives of the people in a very local and pragmatic manner, it would be useful and better than it was when we were there.
And you mentioned something, there was this rich culture of the Reformed tradition that do you think it has been handed down successfully through these different?
I think so, but it depends on the persons. Some people have a certain passion for certain issues. Some don't. And I think most times it depends on who is in office at the time. But I think we succeeded to let people know. I remember in Yaoundé we had a big show there at that Esplanade opposite just around Hilton area there. We had a big so we had a big for 3 days we had a big conference and a big public demonstration of what Protestantism is all about. And in Kenya and in Nairobi and even in New York, we try to show how much the church is a family and not so much individual denominations that count, but stressing on our familyhood, our family nature. I think we did a lot because I remember it was when I became moderator that we tried to reinforce the provision we have made in our constitution that 50% of membership to synod must be women. And I remember delegations that came from some constituencies into the synod, all men. And I remember standing up myself as moderator, telling them they will not be received until they go back and add women in their delegation. And we succeeded there. And also we stepped up training for women, not only within not only locally, but also sending women abroad for the same courses that we had always been sending men. And we try to engage young people also to know that they also have a calling and they also have a capacity to be part of the church as youth. So we had to do a reassessment of all these movements, like the youth fellowship and the women's fellowship. We had to do a reassessment of their goals and their aspirations.
And apart from that, we also had things like Christian University.
Yes, we now have a Christian University. I didn't want to talk about it because they said I was too passionate about it. It was my brainchild.
But I think we want to actually know what did you want Christian University to look like?
I thought that, first of all, I have always advocated that lay people should be involved in church politics, that lay people should be involved in leadership at society level as Christians. So my point was how do we define that level of Christianity in which they must be involved? Because until you do that, you will not be able to know what you really want. So I thought that when lay people become involved in society, when they become administrators, when they become heads of institutions, secular institutions, they will change society by bringing the moral force of their faith to build bridges of love across society and even across the churches. There was a time when we didn't behave among ourselves as brothers and sisters because we were holding up the denomination instead of the Christ.
All right.
And the concern I had was that it is Christ who comes first, not so much the denomination. The denomination, Presbyterian, Baptist, Methodist, Anglican, Roman Catholic. This is an extension of the disagreement of church leaders in Europe.
Yes.
And we inherited them here in Africa. We had no stake in those things, and we were tearing ourselves apart for issues that we really shouldn't have been concerned about. You know, I was invited by the African Baptist Convention, and in my address to them, I told them that they shouldn't be reluctant to come to visit Presbyterians or to be involved in programs with Presbyterians, because I told them that Presbyterians are just good Baptists who are afraid of water.
I see. And so Baptists are just good Presbyterians who love a lot of water.
Exactly.
Right.
And then for the first time they all broke up in laughter, and
yes.
Then the conference could get on. It was all stiff.
But I think that the seed you sowed at that time,
yes,
it's kind of bearing fruit, because we have much more fellowship with the Baptists today.
Yes.
Yeah,
and they still remember that. Those of them who are still alive.
Yes, still remember that. We had some round through the seminary, and we saw names like Chapman. Yes. So, what can you tell us about the history of that person?
Oh, not too much.
Not too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, in the seminary, I think sometimes we have tried to lift up people who played a major role in trying to make the seminary be what it is. Mm-hmm. The seminary, at the time we inherited it from the Basel Mission, it was very much a place where scriptures were interpreted from the point of view of the West. And now we were making an effort now to try to interpret scripture from the point of view of Cameroon in authentic African accents. And I think people like Chapman, they tried to understand what our vision was and to try to see how they could help us to realize that vision.
I think we need to encourage more young Presbyterians like myself to hold on to this vision.
Yes, I think so. Otherwise you don't know what you are living for. And you don't know what you can use your abilities for if you do not know. Look, I always told people, especially young pastors there, I always told them that the first thing you do is to try to find out what task God has for you. And until you find out what task God has for you in calling you to be a pastor, you cannot succeed, because you will not know what route to follow. So when you find out what task God has for you, then you must endeavor to fulfill that task, to make sure that you do it and fulfill it by the time you think that you are living on retirement. When I retired in 2009, yes, I looked at my life. I had spent myself completely on the spot, on the job. And I thought that I had, in my life, tried to fulfill the things that I was addressing as a layperson and the things that I saw as a young pastor. And I addressed them at my level. And I thought time had come for me to hand over the baton to other people. I still had a whole year to retire, but I thought I had done enough. And everything else would be a boomerang.
So you spoke about that task. Was there a basic message that you kept preaching to yourself on a daily basis? One and the same message you kept preaching to yourself?
Yes.
And can we divulge that to us?
Socially, I always believed, and I was saying it just yesterday,
yes,
I always believe that nothing can be politically right when it is morally wrong. And so when they ask me why is the church so involved into societal issues, because we were concerned with things like capital punishment.
All right.
Should governments be engaged in capital punishment? Should people have life imprisonments? Do prisons really reform people, or they are all just centers where they reinforce their bad habits? And people told us, why don't you just preach the gospel? And I said, this is the gospel. The gospel that touches the hardcore of people's center of belief. That's the gospel. And therefore, we try to see how we can make it real for people to realize that the gospel has a relationship with all these social concerns.
I see. And when we come back to things like church government, we remember we had Charles Hodge, the theologian, his father A.A. Hodge. I think there was some kind of issue with church government where we had the ruling elders and the teaching elders, and there were some issues like some church government policies gave much more power to the teaching elders, while others gave much more power to the ruling elders. Which system did you kind of adopt during your own?
Well, first of all, to be honest to you, we took over the church from the Basel Mission. And the Basel Mission had laid a certain tradition where lay people who went to education and the other sciences like medicine for the church were seen to have acquired more knowledge than people who became pastors and earned the same degrees, BSc or BA or PhD. But as long as they were pastors, they were treated like they were lower in quality. And I think we try to address that very vigorously to try to abolish those differences between the laity and the clergy. We gave the wrong impression that the laity were more educated than the clergy. And I remember when I became senior clerk, I became very interested to see that our syllabus in the seminary was completely revised and revisited, and to make it able to award master's degree at the seminary level. And now we have people who come from abroad, who, some of them white people, who queried me that I had made the program very stiff. I said yes, because if we don't, you will come and say it is very weak. The master's degree we are awarding or the bachelor's degree we are awarding is not of the same quality like those in Europe. So we have to make it really strong in content and stiff in realization. And therefore we came out with a complete new syllabus for the system. And of course then they stopped admitting people with O levels. They had to admit people with A level. Now if you go to the seminary, about 2/3 of the students there are people with a first degree. So you can see that we succeeded there to make sure that we revolutionized thinking about seminary training. We have not succeeded to do so for what they earn when they leave, because they still earn less than their brothers and their colleagues who go to lay ministry.
Yes.
But we are working on that.
I see. So basically that's it. So it means we have to tell people that was the history, that's what was happening at that time.
Yeah.
And that's why it's up to what we have now.
Yeah.
Because people instead think, hey, in those days, Mami Elder or Papa Elder had much more say than the pastor.
Yes, they did, because they were up to now they were the chairman of congregations and chairman of presbyteries. But now they now realize that they are only chairmen because they are working with pastors who are the administrative and clerical head of the church. And we took quite some time to educate them that the church cannot exist without a pastor. But the church can be without an elder, without a chairman. Actually, the model we have is to share the responsibilities of governance between laity and the pastors. So make sure that when it comes to administrative issues, the lay people assist the pastor a lot in trying to getting involved and leading in that area so that the pastor can have more time to concern himself or herself over her stewardship as a pastor, so that at least the spiritual things should not suffer loss.
So you made mention of some bonds of contention that existed because maybe we wanted to uphold the denomination, the name of the denomination above Christ.
Yes.
But at the same time, we can understand that we have some rich culture, some rich heritage in the Reformed tradition. What would you say to these Presbyterians who are ashamed of their Presbyterian heritage?
It will be difficult to find out Presbyterians who are ashamed of their Presbyterian heritage, because as much as possible they realize that they have liberties in the church which don't exist, which people in other churches don't have. They are fully involved. If you look at the synod, the lay leadership of the synod and membership is more than 2/3%. And they realize that the things that lay people do, the offices they hold in the PCC, in some other churches they don't hold them. The pastor is everything. So I think that most Presbyterians who are conscious of what Presbyterianism is all about are happy to be Presbyterians. Of course, there are those you find out who are always critical of the leadership, of the moderator, of the synod clerk, or Reverend Who, and so on and so forth. But that is human nature, and I think that should be encouraged, in that they should make their critical voices full of reason, not just emotion. Yes.
Alright. And finally, we are going to ask you one last question.
Yeah.
And this question is, what the Church of tomorrow, Church of today and tomorrow, as posterity goes after you, what do you think we should have as anchor, especially in the PCC?
Look, there are a lot of interesting traits now,
Yes.
which are coming in. There are a lot of new voices coming in, all claiming to be church, all claiming to be prophets. I think that the church should be able to test the spirits and be able to distinguish what is authentic and what is not, what is real and what is not real, and be able to let the church be fully anchored, really, on the rock of ages, on God, the provider and the maker, and Christ, the head of the church. I think that the church of tomorrow should strive to be the seeds we have sown on ecumenism, on making the church intrinsically Christian, and trying to improve its authenticity of the proclamation of the word in complete Cameroonian accents, and in a background and context which is Cameroonian.
But there is such a word today as doctrine is divisive. However, to test the spirit, we must be grounded in sound doctrine, like the right.
Yes.
So what would you say to these people who hate that name? Because when pastors come and say, we are going to teach you, people are like, you're just going to give me back like your Presbyterian doctrine. You're just going to, how can you encourage these people not to see that word from a negative aspect?
Is to let them know that they cannot be what they don't know. And until they know what is the content of Presbyterianism, they won't succeed in trying to bring in the much needed change in the church. So doctrine itself, I don't think it's bad. The problem is that a lot of people have abused the concept of doctrine, what doctrine stands for, and some people have used it to justify their lordship over the church. But if you take doctrine as from a systematic theological point of view, you realize that it is something that the church should be able to cleanse and reinforce, because otherwise you cannot preach what you do not understand, what you are not.
So basically that's it. And you still made mention of something again, that from a systematic theological standpoint, doctrine should be used to cleanse.
Yes.
What happens when someone is sitting under sound doctrine and realizes that what is being taught is different from what is being practiced within his church? How can he winsomely address that issue?
It should do so using the structures of dialogue and conversation that are established in his own church. Because, for instance, in the Presbyterian Church in Cameroon, Christians have the liberty to raise their dissent of issues that that worry them at the congregational meeting.
Yes.
And if the issues are such that the congregation cannot address, they will raise them at the presbytery. If they reach the presbytery and they cannot address them, they will raise them at the synod, at the level of the synod. So there are platforms that have been provided for lay people to be able to vent their feelings and their opinions about issues that worry them as Presbyterians or as Christians. But it is wrong for one to believe that because that is his belief, that is what is right.
Yes.
Most times people are confused what their wishes are and what the will of God is. So because he believes that this should be done, he misinterprets it to be understood as the will of God.
What about the generation that does not read? What would you say to a
That's unfortunate. Yes, it's unfortunate. Even churches now, you go to my church, some of our churches, we are singing just choruses and choruses and choruses without having time to sing the hymns which are really written out of sound biblical and theological background. And some don't have time to read the textbook, they read flyers.
Yes.
And in flyers, they're just catchphrases. And you pick it up without knowing the content. Even if you knew the content, you realize that that flyer alone cannot give you enough knowledge of what the church is all about.
So it's our encouragement now to the Great Presbyterians would be to become a reading population.
Yes, and also for the groups. That's what the groups are trying to address. I mean, we just finished a workshop here, a retreat here for women. So that the Christian Women Fellowship, they have some material which guides them in their studies throughout the year. The CY, the youth group, they have the same. The men fellowship have the same. So when they stick to their work material, it helps them to try to stay on course as far as content is concerned.
What about encouraging us on personal study? What would you say? How much time?
Read.
How much time do you dedicate for reading? Because
now I'm getting weaker, not as strong as I used to be, but a lot of time. A lot of time. I think that if you cease to read, you begin to die. So I encourage young people to read, and spend money to buy books, and make sure that you buy not just books which are propaganda material to reinforce the existence of a particular denomination or a particular sectarian group, but sound material. And like I say, the Bible says, test the spirit. I encourage young people to read a lot. The young people are not reading as much as it was 20, 30 years ago. Yeah.
Do you think that there's this kind of stigma when you see maybe a younger person who is reading a lot and people seem to say, hey, because you're reading too much, maybe you should go to seminary? Is it supposed to be so?
It's not supposed to be so because not every Presbyterian should be seminary. But lay people also need information, basic theological information. And that is why I'm saying that in the various groups, the youth movement, the women's movement, and the bench movement, a lot of effort is being spent there. A lot of effort is being put in to make sure that the members, ordinary members of the pew in their groups, are uplifted in knowledge of what it's all about. They have material there on HIV, cancer, on polygamy, on corruption, so about prostitution. It's there. And most times they invite experts. They want to talk about HIV/AIDS, for instance. They will invite a medical doctor to come and give them information about that so that they are fully and properly informed about the matter at stake.
And you spoke about the fact that you grew up in a house with family that barely knew you because you were always into ministry.
Yes.
What word can you give to ministers as well about the support that came from your family so that these persons' families can also support them?
I would tell them to try as much as possible to spend quality time with their wives and their children. I remember once I was traveling out to address a conference overseas, and I said I'll leave the house a little bit late by 9 o'clock, thinking that the children would have gone to bed since it was a midnight flight in Douala. So by 9:30, 10, I was tiptoeing outside, and my first boy, he's 40 now. He ran to me and held me. He said, "Papa, where are you going to? Look at the time. Where are you going to?" And it struck me. I almost went back to the house. I thought he had gone asleep, and the mother would explain to him in the morning that I had traveled. The same thing with being husband. I realized very much that I knew very little of what was going on, what concerned this child and what concerned that other child, as compared to how much my wife knew. And I encourage young people to try as much as possible to spend time for family. Therefore, they have to make their rightful priorities. If they have a little bit of time, are they going to spend it in a nightclub, or are they going to spend it with family, or go out together and have a social time? It's very, very important, because when the family breaks down, it is very sad when the pastor's family breaks down. I had a friend of mine, a young friend of mine, who had read what I had written and became a pastor, a young American boy, white American boy in Chicago. So he came and stayed with me for months, looking at my lifestyle. When I visited him next in Chicago, his wife had divorced him. And he told me the wife was right. He spent more than 85% working, and he thought he was working for the kingdom, but his family was broken down. And he took me in tears. And the wife left him, and because she said she didn't marry just empty space, she married a human being. So, and abroad, I've seen it happen more. Here also, I've seen it happen to a certain extent, where the families suffer infidelity because they are not as welded together as they are supposed to be. So it's a very serious thing, and if you can encourage lay people, or mostly pastors, that they should work for the kingdom, work for Christ, but they should not abandon and neglect presence at home.
That's quite a good one. And driving statistics, this week we have been talking on family on Great Presbyterians, and there are statistics that show that the children without fathers, without a present father figure, usually more of these children will go wayward than those with their father's presence. So I think this concern is really one to raise.
It is.
I hope the young pastors and the laity are listening to your experience. And we're thanking God and thanking especially your wife for sharing you with us.
Thank you.
Because it's a sacrifice.
Thank you.
It's a sacrifice. Thank you for sharing with us, and for God, and thank you for keeping both of you right up to this.
Thank you.
This time. Thank you very much, Very Reverend.
God bless you, and I think that I'm very, very elated and encouraged when I see young people like yourself taking up a venture as challenging as this. It shows that there is great hope for the future of the church. I remember very much when Reverend Dissent died now. He died at one time. He was retiring. He was asked, how does he see the church now? He said, well, it's strong. What about the people? He said, it's great. They said, why? He said, because it is going to be in the hands of the youth. The youth are more than 2/3 of the population of the church. So we should have decisions, we should have programs that are youth-oriented in order to give them a sense of belonging and purpose and meaning in the church.
And we think that there is some small tip that you can give to add some spice into that platform that you created for the youth. Your own personal
I don't know. I think that the young people should see what I can do and how I can do that, and ask me whether I'm prepared to share that. But I am prepared to give myself and to offer anything I can, intellectually or physically, to make sure that the dream of making youth Christian and making them alive, that dream shouldn't die.
Thank you very much, Reverend.
God bless you.
On this note, we end with Ruminations by Great Presbyterians. Thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and don't forget to follow us on YouTube, on Facebook, and on Twitter. Thank you very much.
God bless you.